But you point out that incitement is itself a form of public disorder, that this is
Yes.
going to create more violence, that this is designed, that's why we call it incitement, designed specifically to end in additional violence, that different additional crimes against the state, against the magistrate. And so, therefore, it's not simply enough to punish just the individual who did the crime if there are those around them that are building up a system, building up a call, building up a reward ultimately for committing the crime in the first place. And I think this is what some people got worried about, right? Because we're saying, okay, it's not enough to just stop at this shooter. Like, yes, the shooter should be punished, but we have people who are openly calling for violence. We have people who are repeatedly funding organizations that are enabling violence. And this needs to be the wider scope of what's going on here. The Trump administration has already promised to go after NGOs, to go after Antifa, to designate it as a foreign terrorist organization, to start breaking up its cells. We've seen some arrests at the site of crimes when it comes to ICE agents being assaulted, blocked, this kind of thing. But we have not seen a wider campaign of striking at the heart of this terror network that is encouraging these attacks. Can you explain why biblically it is all right to move to these moments of incitement, to move to these organizations that, while they may not be pulling the trigger, are creating an environment, creating an incentive structure, and enabling the violence itself?
Yeah, I think the Bible and Christian theology are both are both realistic about how these things work, right? And that culpability is not limited to the sort of final action. The anything that is traditional commentary on the Sixth Commandment itself would say, if you are inciting this, if you're encouraging it, if you're preying upon especially weak people who will take you up on it foolishly, if you're creating the kind of environment where it's foreseeable and that this is going to emerge, especially against like specified targets, it's one thing to just, I don't think most people would take an argument that's just like, you just go outside and somehow be violent, just a general encouragement. But we've seen, I give this thinly veiled hypothetical of like, what if you were a journalist who for the past like 10 years has every day been going out and joining your other journalist friends to declare so-and-so Satan, and then to justify that Satan, of course, can be resisted by violence, even lethal force. And you do this over and over and over again until people take you up on it. You have culpability in this. And this is what we've seen from our journalistic class for a decade at this point, since, 2015, 2016. And then, of course, what you're referring to is even more culpable, not just the encouragement, but the mechanized and organized enabling and provisions for this kind of violence. So it's the encouraging sort of propagandistic side, but then it's also, providing the munitions, we might say, certainly culpable in this regard. And so therefore, this culpability should be met with public vengeance. Again, not private vigilante justice. In fact, that's what we're trying to discourage and punish in this regard. But with public vengeance, and it's perfectly justified, in fact, good for Christians to be enemies of disorder and corruption and so on and so forth, to encourage the magistrate to call on him to exercise public vengeance on these things.
So I think the word vengeance is one that's going to give a lot of people pause in this, right?
Yeah.
They might say, well, I don't mind justice or deterrence, maybe even, right? Like maybe they say, well, I understand why we might need to execute the bad guy to deter further crimes, right? But the word vengeance for a lot of people, that sounds hateful. That sounds, the retributive justice is the problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? That ultimately we should only be deterring and we should never have retribution. But I think that aspect is important because, as you say, these crimes do call out for vengeance. There is ultimately a recognition that justice means vengeance at some level. And so if there is not the understanding that you are ultimately making right some aspect of this crime, that the proper wage is being paid, then I think we do miss something as a society. That doesn't mean that we are reveling in a violence or torture or these things, but recognizing, as I think you point out in the piece, that clemency itself is a crime against the victim if it's done by the magistrate without any justice. The clemency there is something that is giving them an opportunity to pull back perhaps excesses of vengeance. But that does not mean that we should not, in general, have this vengeance, because if you don't have it, as you're pointing out, if the state will not will not take its role in this moment, then the average person will, because just the laws of nature will
Mhm.
drive them towards this end if they do not see it meted out by the state.
Yeah, that's right. Briefly say, then circle back to the point of retribution, but there's a sense in which a inattentive secular authority that is not it is tempting people to take matters into their own hands, right? And this itself you would be culpable for. You should. There's a great article from Henry Cabot Lodge, way back in the early 20th century, about a vigilante lynching of Italian immigrants that takes place in Louisiana because they suspect them of being in the mafia. And he says, obviously, this cannot be condoned and these people should be punished, but this is Congress's fault for their immigration policy. They've created the conditions where people will do this, and it's totally foreseeable, and it's on you guys, right? So it's perfectly reasonable way to work this out and think about it. So if an inattentive or a weak government paves the way for this kind of thing, and this is what you want to avoid. This is what a just government should avoid. On the question of like retribution, vengeance, I mean, these are just words we're uncomfortable with, I suppose, but all law is coercive. This is the point. It's an obligation backed by punishment. This is how you keep order. And then the punishment can't just be mere deterrence or threat if it's never if it's never doled out. You have to actually punish people for violations. And this is part of the deterrence. It's most effective deterrence. Otherwise, it's all toothless. So this is just the nature of law and secular authority. And it is retribution on behalf of the whole when these things are broken, when public order is abused. So this is just what we're doing all the time, or should be doing, if we actually uphold our laws. So this is not a strange thing. And especially heinous acts, right? We're not talking about like speeding fines, but heinous acts of violence, public assassinations, political assassinations should be met with retribution and vengeance on behalf of the whole. I just think that's unavoidable and proper. And then you're right. I have a discussion. We can talk more about it of clemency. Of course, this is like, leniency with a sentence when the letter of the law would say you have to execute them or something. And the magistrate judges can use this at their discretion. It's theirs. But the proper way to exercise it is if equity or if justice calls for a commuted sentence, that the letter of the law somehow doesn't fit the scenario perfectly, and justice actually would be to forego sentencing. When this is not the case, it is wrong to do so, to exercise clemency in sort of a gratuitous way, in a weak way. And it doesn't promote the public good, and it doesn't pursue equity. And in most cases, the law has already been formulated to provide temperance. That's its point in this regard, and order, and it should be followed. And there's no question in the case of public assassinations whether or not this is legal or illegal. So this is not a case of clemency. Neither is it the case that abusing public trust with evil NGOs and slush funds and all these sorts of things is in any way legal or appropriate to the ends that these kind of carve-outs were provided. So those also should not be provided clemency.
You also discuss the importance of particularly violence against public figures, figures that are part of the state, hold official office, or otherwise represent the body politic in a larger way, and the importance that those must be punished, and they must be punished severely. Can you talk a little bit about why? I mean, I think a lot of people just say, oh, well, of course the politicians will want to punish anybody who hurts them. That's going to be their first priority. But you make a case that this is actually critical for the common good as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the public violence, meaning not just that it's done publicly like everyone sees it, but violence against public figures who are representative figures who constitute like a compound or public moral person. They're more than just themselves because of either their position or they're following these sorts of things. They matter to the Commonwealth in a different way. And so this is more acutely an act against the whole country, not just one private individual, like they have a disagreement, over who owes whom money or something. This is an attack on the entire nation, the entire Commonwealth. And so it must be met with particular retribution for that purpose. And we even treat murders generally this way. This is why murder cases are not handled through private suit or civil suit. You actually are not in charge of the prosecution. It's the victim or the family of the victim. You're not in charge with the prosecution. The state conducts that on behalf of the whole, because all murders are considered to be a crime against the society, not just against the individual. So we already do this and already understand this, and it's even more the case when that person, and I think everyone intuitively knows this, the way they mourn about it, the way they understand something big has happened, and throughout the history of any assassinations of public figures in America, this is obviously the case. It means something different, and for good reason.